Joining me today is Don Ford. He's an attorney, and we're going to be talking about protecting your legacy, how to avoid estate plan management. When a family member passes away, emotions run high and finances can quickly get complicated. In some cases, grief meets greed, and the legacy someone worked a lifetime to build can be lost through management or misconduct. Well, Don Ford, who's a board certified probate and estate attorney and managing partner of Ford and Bergner LLP, is here with me today to just explain how estate plans fall apart, why executors sometimes fail in their duties, and what families can do to protect their inheritance before assets disappear. A Baylor-educated attorney with backgrounds in accounting, taxation, estate planning, and business planning. He began his career as a tax attorney for an international consulting firm before dedicating his practice entirely to probate and estate matters. Welcome to the show, Don.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great to have you here. And as you said before we went on the air, you can answer any questions that I'm going to ask you, right?
I will try my best.
Okay, try your best. The first question I want to know is like, why did you decide to switch from a tax attorney, or not switch, but really to dedicate your whole career to probate and estate matters? I mean, was it personal or professional or both?
Well, it was kind of a combination of both, honestly. When I was at the international consulting firm, I was a tax attorney who did trust and estate tax matters. And so when I gone to law school, that was really my focus in law school, was on these matters. Now, as kind of a precursor to that, my grandfather was somebody who kind of lived the American dream. He left the farm at 19 and with a little borrowed money in his pocket and went to the big city and made his fortune. And so he always kind of just talked about the dream of building wealth and managing wealth and all those kinds of things. So I kind of grew up with it that way, but then in law school really studied it in earnest. So it was really kind of always my focus and my passion.
Okay, well, I mean, it's an interesting topic. And the other thing is, when I knew I was going to interview you, I was looking it up. Most people are meant, I guess the statistics, correct me if I'm wrong, but only say 30% of Americans or adults have wills. They don't even want to broach the topic. So they're somehow I'm kind of, as a social worker, getting into the attitudes that people have, that they're afraid. They think that, first of all, only wealthy people, which I understand is not true, need estate planning. That's not true, right?
No.
So yeah, let's talk about that. Why do people procrastinate? Why don't they want to get their estates in order?
Well, look, I think a lot of people just don't like to think that they might die someday,
Yeah, and we
right?
all are.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I've got a client right now. She's about to be 90 years old. She has an autistic son that she's cared for her entire life. And until her husband died a couple of years ago when she was 87, I don't think she ever considered that she would ever die because she was always going to take care of her son. And all of a sudden, she's having some health issues and she's finally having to face facts that one of these days she's not going to be here. And now she's having to plan, and honestly planning later than she should have.
Yeah.
But she just did never want to face the fact that she might die someday.
So when people, and I think that's probably fairly common. I mean, we all can't wait till we're 90 because we're probably
Right.
not going to get there, or 95 or whatever. But so what do we do? How do you get people to really be responsible? And because that's what it's about, isn't it? Being responsible to yourself, to your family. Where do we begin?
Well, so look, I think part of it is a mindset shift, right?
Yeah.
This is not about it seems like some people think if I don't make a will, then it means I'm not going to die, right?
Yeah.
It's not about making the will and then ensuring that you're going to die. You're going to die regardless. This is an effort at how do I make it easier on my kids once I'm gone, right? So if people started looking at it as this is a way to help my kids, not this is a way for me to think about me no longer being here. I think that mindset shift does help.
Yeah, that's a great idea, because then you're putting it in the positive rather than I'm going to die. That's depressing.
Right.
But putting it, because yeah, I'm going to help my kids. It's a good thing. It's a positive thing, and do it right. So, all right. So, talk to us. What do we do? I mean, I know that some of the things that you mentioned is we have to get the right executor. How do we do that?
So let's understand what the executor does, right? So
Okay,
the
tell us. Yeah.
executor, yeah, so the executor is the person that if somebody dies, they bring the will back to me or somebody like me, and they're the one that's going to be in charge of wrapping up the affairs of the estate, right? So pulling together all the assets, paying any debts if there are any, and then distributing the assets pursuant to the will, or if there's not a will, then pursuant to state law, right? So the executor has a lot of power for that period of time. They have kind of a finite role, but they've got power during that period of time. So if you've got four kids and you've designated the one kid who's always kind of had a power trip over their siblings, designating them as the executor is probably not the best way to go, because they've kind of lorded over their siblings in life. They're going to certainly lord over them in your death, and it's going to create conflict. By contrast, if you pick the one who's the meekest and the one who's the least willing to stand up to their siblings and is, likely to be kind of passive about it all, maybe that's not the best person either. It is somebody that has to take on a responsibility. They've got to fulfill a role, but they need to be fair with their. I'm just presuming mom and dad die and they leave everything to the kids, whether it's to the kids or it's to siblings or to a charity or whoever it's to, friends. The executor needs to be fair with those people. They need to do the job correctly. So I say to clients all the time, if you have one child who's an artist and can't ever focus on finances, and one child who's a CPA, you probably ought to pick the CPA child, because they're going to get it done well. Really thinking about the attributes of the personalities and characteristics of that executor are really important.
So when a client comes into you, and wants to do their will, maybe I'm backtracking a little bit. I mean, you've described a lot of the issues. So they sit down, they want to write the will, but family issues are so, I guess, what's the word? Complicated, I guess. You've
Sure.
mentioned a couple things. Do you have, just the whole real process, the checklist? Do you talk to them about family relations? I mean, how do you do it? What do you as the
Yes.
attorney? Yeah.
Yeah, so look, I mean, we kind of guide. I like to guide them through a conversation rather than sending them a checklist and saying, fill this out, fill this out. I like to have a conversation with them. And when we talk about the executor role or who's going to manage money for minor children or something like that, I asked them to, tell me about the attributes of the people you're thinking about. Some of them know immediately off the top of their heads, this is who we'd want to do it. And others struggle with that. And so we talk about, well, tell me about the attributes. Tell me, who's the fairest, who's, all the most organized, who's going to get the job done, all of those things. And we kind of talk through that and give them really some things to think about. Some of these folks have concerns over, well, gosh, I mean, that's a really tough conversation to have with my child about, I want them to be the one in charge, or it's a tough conversation to have with the child that I don't want to be in charge. um, we have a business consultant we've worked with for a number of years, and he's in the process right now of writing a book about the difficult conversation. And sometimes you just have that difficult conversation so that it doesn't create chaos on the opposite end.
What do you do about, for instance, okay, so you have the children, you say, you want the person to protect their kids. But okay, let's say the kids are, I'll give you an example, for instance, like you have a daughter-in-law or several or son-in-laws who that they come into the picture, and the person who's doing the will is afraid that might be an issue or that might be a problem.
Sure. So look, I mean, I talk with clients all the time about, they say, well, we love our son, but his wife, boy, she really kind of controls him. She's, we're worried about her. I said, okay, well, let's really take that into consideration, because if you're going to name your son to be the executor, but you think his wife is going to jump in there and overshadow with your other children, maybe that's not the best person to pick, because it's going to create the most conflict. um, those the in-law issues are really important considerations, because look, your kids, your own family members, but sometimes when they marry somebody else, it changes the dynamic. Not
I think it
necessarily a
always
bad.
changes the dynamic.
It does. It does. But
Yeah,
but sometimes that changes for the better, right?
yeah,
Sometimes you go, oh, this person that married my son has just really helped him to get serious about life. And sometimes you say, boy, she just ruined him, right?
you're right.
Uh, and so it really kind of depends on the nature of that change, as to how it impacts on these decisions.
And what about grandchildren? Let's say I'm going even to the next generation, right? Some of the kids, some of the, some of your children may have children, others won't. I mean, it gets pretty complicated, doesn't it?
It does. And so, look, I mean, we have clients that come in and they've got three kids and they've got, four grandkids from the three kids. And maybe one of the kids is still of childbearing age. And so we might have more grandchildren. So they might say, hey, look, we want to create four shares of our estate, one share for each of the kids and one share for all the grandkids to share, equally. Or they might say, look, I've got three kids. They have different numbers of grandkids, so I'm just going to leave everything to the three kids, and then we know that they'll take care of their own kids. And look, sometimes there are issues where a grandchild or even a child is special needs. And so we know that this child is going to need care over the long term. So we want to set some money aside and trust for that child or grandchild to provide for their care long term. Those are always issues. Or maybe a grandchild has a drug addiction, and so you say, well, we wouldn't want anything to go directly to that child because this drug abuse problem. There's all sorts of family dynamics that have to be taken into consideration in thinking about how to craft a will.
And how long does it usually take? I mean, I guess it depends on how complicated the financial stuff is, right? I mean, in terms of, I mean, you might have businesses, you might not, I mean, there's a lot of different things, right, that come into play.
Sure. So
But
look,
yeah,
yeah, for the average client, the client that's not dealing with a multi Fortune 500 business or something like that.
okay. And what is the average? What is the average client, let's say? Because people think, well, if I don't have a lot of money and I haven't accumulated a lot of wealth, maybe I don't really need to do this.
Well, so look, I mean, if you own a home, you need to be thinking about a will. If you own assets, cars, stocks, bank accounts, whatever that is, you need to be thinking about a will. If you've got oil and gas mineral interest somewhere, you need to be thinking about a will. Look, if all you have is an apartment that you rent, you don't own any land, you don't own any real estate, and you have a bank account, you can effectively give that bank account away by creating a beneficiary designation with the bank. And so you die, the bank account goes to the beneficiary listed on the account, and that's the end of it. That can be an effective way to do that. But if you have substantial assets, multiple bank accounts, cars, house, any of that kind of stuff, you need to be thinking about a will. In today's world, with the most recent tax legislation, a taxable estate is over $15 million. So that means if you have less than a $15 million estate, you're not paying any estate tax. That covers the vast majority of people, right? So we don't have to take into consideration tax issues for most people. And so, those are cases I would consider uncomplicated where we're not having to take into consideration the tax issues.
How do you explain things to people? There's so much, I mean, everyone's trying to protect themselves these days, obviously, including the attorneys. Like with all, the legalese, people don't it's difficult to understand it. Are you good at really being able at communicating to your clients in a way that they understand what their estate planning is all about, what they're actually doing, what it really means?
So look, we try our best.
Yeah.
Uh, every client's different, but what I tell clients is, I mean, we really kind of talk about the way that this is going to break down for clients. Let's say that mom and dad had a $3 million estate, right? And they've got two children. They're going to leave their $3 million to the two children. The money, mom and dad want the money to be used for them as long as they're alive, and then they want to go to the kids. We usually include a provision that says it's going to go into trust for the kids at the time of their death, at the time of mom and dad's death, so that the kids have some creditor protection around those trusts. Um, we explain that to the parents as they're doing their wills. We go over it. We send them their draft documents to review. We answer questions if they've got questions. 50% really understand that and take it to heart, and the other 50% probably don't. I'm surprised sometimes when we have a client come back 3 or 4 years later and ask us questions that were pretty central to our discussion 3 or 4 years earlier. Um, but we try our best to explain that and for
So in
clients
other
to
words, you're
understand it.
shocked that they didn't understand what you were talking about, like right? Is that what you mean?
I think they
Yeah.
understood it at the time. I don't think they retained it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so they're coming back and asking now to clarify. Now, wait a minute, is this how our estate is set up? Yes, it is. Yes, it is. This is how we did it. But look, it's a complicated topic. And if you wanted to try to explain engineering and high level calculus to me, even in boiled down terms,
Right.
3 years later, I probably would come back to you and ask exactly the same questions I asked the first time because I may have retained a little bit, but I didn't retain a lot. It's a
Right.
complicated topic, and
Yeah.
so sometimes it does take continual education on some of those topics.
Yeah. Continue. That's a good idea. You have to really keep up with it, I guess. And I'm assuming that you have to, as your circumstances change, and maybe this is the obvious, you have to change your will or the estate planning, right? Divorce, for instance, okay, because if 50% or even 40%, maybe it's less now, people get divorced, then what happens? You really do have to change things around, I assume.
Yeah, so most in every state law differs on this particular issue, but most of the time under state law, if you get divorced, it automatically terminates any benefit under your will to your now divorced spouse. But it probably does change the way that your will needs to be structured because now you may have had your wife designated as your executor, and now you want to designate your son or your brother or somebody like that. um, so you definitely need to take those things into consideration, but also if you have another major change in family circumstance, like we had a new child that was born or we had another grandchild. I mean, I had a client come in one time and the husband was 65, they were both about to retire from working. They had a will that was 35 or 40 years old at that point. They had four children, and the last time they did their will they only had one child, and so one of their children was provided for under the will and the other three uh, would not have received anything if mom and dad had died.
Yeah,
And they thought, oh, we thought it was about time to come in and redo our will. I said, no, it's way past time. Like
yeah,
you should have added those kids as you went along. So
yeah,
that's the
that's
way it goes.
scary, actually. Yeah.
Right, right.
Or what about dad? Mom and dad, 65, they get divorced. Dad marries someone who's 30 and they have three kids.
Look, that's a common
That's a
issue these
common, yeah.
days. Yeah, it's really common these. And look, I mean, that's where this really gets messy and unfortunate is that, dad wants to take care of his younger three children, or maybe he really legitimately does want to take care of his older children from his first marriage, but he either feels pressured into leaving everything to his younger wife, or just by happenstance it all goes to the younger wife. Those kids from the first marriage are going to get cut out. They're going to get nothing. And so I mean it really does take some specific planning to appropriately take care of those older children in that scenario. It is a tough conversation.
So what happens, or does this happen often that people actually want to, I don't know the legal term for it, but the will, we've talked about a couple of these scenarios that won't go over well with the family, that they want to revoke, isn't it? What is the word for they want to say, well, the will or the estate planning was not done properly and we want, yeah, what is it?
They want to contest it.
Contest it. I can't think, yeah, to
Yeah.
contest it, yeah.
Yeah, so look, I mean, that happens, and generally speaking, the grounds for contesting a will or an estate plan are that the person who created the will, let's say dad in our scenario, that he lacked capacity at the time that he executed the will, or that he was unduly influenced into executing the will. So somebody held a gun to his head and said, sign this document even though you don't want to do it. Those are generally the two grounds that you see, being employed when somebody's going to contest an estate plan.
Okay, and does that happen often?
Oh, it happens
Yeah,
daily.
they
Happens all the time, right?
they come in and out of your office daily.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no. I mean, and maybe I'm just jaded because I see too many of those, and maybe there's a bunch of people that are really happy and don't ever do that, but I see way too much of it.
So in other words, you really have to be careful. Lack of communication, not good, right? You need to be transparent or as transparent as you can be. But estate planning is really, it touches on all those psychological, legal, all of those kinds of things, right? It really melds the two, I think.
Oh, 100% right. And look, I mean, part of the problem that it brings in is family dynamics get set early, right? I mean, your kids are 5 and 8, and the dynamics of the family may be set at that point. And when the kids are 55 and 58, those same dynamics still exist, right? The 8-year-old hit the 5-year-old over the head with the Tonka truck, and the 5-year-old has never gotten over it, and they're 55 and 58, and the 55-year-old is still bitter about the fact that his older brother hit him with a Tonka trunk, 50 years earlier. Those family dynamics really come into play, years down the road. And especially when you're talking about mom's died or dad's died, and how are we going to divide up the assets? Maybe there's a child that mom and dad always really kind of helped out because she wasn't as successful as her siblings. And so she feels like, well, I should get a bigger share of mom and dad's estate because they always gave me more than they gave everybody else. And the siblings are thinking, well, you should get less now because they always gave you so much more. That family dynamic really starts to impact how this all fleshes out at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, you're so right. I think all those issues that you had at 5 years, old with your siblings, you still have them at 70 years old. The same
Yeah,
thing. Yeah, they
right.
haven't changed.
No, that's right. That's right.
So you mentioned, I think earlier in the interview, there is someone in your office who either writing a book about these issues, or is that, I think that's
Well,
what you
so
mentioned.
it's not. He doesn't work for our firm.
Oh,
He's a business consultant that we have worked with, outside of our firm. But he is going to be. He's writing a book that's going to be about having these difficult conversations, and it is a really good conversation to have because look, it's better for your kids to hear from you. This is why I selected your brother to be the executor rather than you. This is why I selected you to make medical decisions for me rather than your brother. It's better for them to hear from you than for you to be dead and them to try to have to guess at why you made these decisions. And sometimes those guesses are not right, and it creates bitterness. And
are you still there?
yeah.
Yeah, I heard. Um, let's talk. And now, okay, so those are a lot of the issues. Have we covered a lot? There are, I guess, I mean, there are so many, right? I mean, but I think we've kind of, the family dynamics, I mean, come into play, obviously. It's not
Sure.
just legal, right? So tell us, can you give me some more examples of issues that you've had to deal with, these kinds of issues
Well,
that
look, I mean, any example you can think of, we've probably dealt
you've
with it.
done?
Uh, but look, I mean, whether it is the blended family, that's where our big issues come in, is with the blended family.
Yeah,
I had a case years ago where the husband and wife each had kids from their prior marriages, and then they married each other, and they had two kids together. um and it just, the two kids that they had together, one of the two kids they had together felt really entitled to a bigger share of everything because she was their youngest daughter. She was the only daughter of both of them, and they had always kind of helped her out, and she literally pitched a fit over, well, I didn't get everything that I think mom and daddy wanted me to get. And it just caused tons of litigation, tons of attorney's fees, because she really was being unrealistic and greedy. I hate to use the word greedy, but she was being greedy about what she thought she was entitled to, when the mom and the dad really wanted to treat all of their kids equally. And and look, I mean, the emotion part of it that plays in, I think, is nobody really gets to dictate how you grieve over the loss of a family member, right? Some have a really close relationship with mom or dad, and when they lose mom or dad, they just, really grieve that. Other people don't have as close of a relationship. And even in the same family, they may grieve differently, right? And so that
yeah,
grieving causes them sometimes to act out emotionally that maybe even if you got a couple years down the road, they wouldn't act that way then. But just the strength of emotion at the time causes them to do things that they wouldn't ordinarily do. So
yeah.
it really is a tough balance of a lot of competing factors when you're thinking about these issues.
Yeah, I think you said, I think I read it in the beginning, something that you had said, that the grief can turn to greed, and quite quickly.
Sure.
I mean,
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah, I
So
mean, look, we've seen so many times where, the parents have supported one of the children, and not supported financially supported one of the children, for one reason or another, And then that child is all of a sudden 60 years old, mom and dad are gone, and that child's like, well, wait a minute, how am I going to be supported now? I've never had to support myself. And they start really grasping for, I got to collect every straw I can in order to support myself the rest of my life. And they're trying to take it all from their siblings.
Well, you have an interesting day. You do not have boring, yeah, your 9 to 5 job is not, and it's not 9 to 5, but it is not boring. It's interesting, exciting, and it's been great. We only have 3 minutes left, so I mean, I've really enjoyed this conversation. But like I said in the beginning, give us, are there websites we can go to, platforms, get more information about what you've been talking about and
Yeah,
about
so look,
you and
our
your.
website is pretty robust. Our website is fordbergner.com. So that's FORDBERGNER.com. Each state has various resources. The probate rules and the estate planning rules vary by state. And so, depending on where you are and where you plan to be, you should definitely do research by state. There's a lot of great lawyers across the country that have, great websites and informative websites and all those kinds of things. And I said to somebody yesterday, they were asking me, for those who maybe are low income and don't have the ability to go pay a lawyer to create a will for them, there are a lot of times the local bar association will offer free resources. Maybe once a year they'll have a wills clinic or something where if you're low income and you qualify, they'll draft the will for you for free. There are resources kind of at all income levels um, to deal with these issues. Even some states are now promulgating free wills on their Supreme Court website or something like that. So there are a lot of resources if people are willing to just do some digging and try to find what their local bar association or courts offer.
Right. So that's good. That's good information because everybody obviously is in a different situation financially. But as you're
Right.
saying, the resources are out there and so are you. But thanks so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate it.
Hey,
Good.
it was a
Yeah.
ton of fun. It was great to visit with you.
Great. Great to visit with you too. Thanks. Don Ford. Joining me today is Tim Beard. His new book is Look Twice, Your Guide to Staying Safe in an Unsafe World. In a time when personal safety is increasingly top of mind, author and former CIA officer and security expert, Tim Beard launches a groundbreaking new series of 3 books designed to give readers the practical tools and mindset to stay alert, aware, and protected in their everyday lives. He shows readers how to stay safe at home and at work, from identifying vulnerabilities to mastering basic precautions that greatly reduce risk. The book also offers step by step advice for navigating ordinary outings, what Tim calls out in town. This is including running errands, using ATMs, and moving through public spaces confidently and safely. He's earned a Master's of International Policy and Practice from the Elliott School of International Affairs at George Washington University, and he also holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in Political Science from Auburn University. Welcome to the show, Tim. Nice to have you on.
Thanks so much. I appreciate you having me on today.
Oh boy, this is a big topic. This affects all of us, right? All of us every single day. And
Absolutely.
yeah, I read your book from cover to cover, and uh, l- I guess the overall I guess the overall preparedness, um, I guess, be practical, be prepared, right? Isn't that what we need to do? Be prepared. This is what, yeah.
Absolutely. I want to start off by telling your audience, first off, I want to encourage you can do this. Security is not hard. It's doing the fundamentals, doing the basics, the right stuff every time. It's being detailed and it's planning. It's keeping yourself away from where the challenges are. So, the work that I used to do as a CIA officer, I'm retired from CIA, but the work that I used to do and that my colleagues do, still doing right now, you have to plan and plan and plan and plan and plan. And when something happens, the plan's going to fall apart. I understand that, but it gives you a direction to go. It gives you something to go and fall back on. So I'll use this phrase: if you are not planning, you're planning to fail. And so the whole book series is about getting ahead of this stuff and about planning and about mitigating risk.
Okay. So we're mitigating risk every single day, right?
Mhm.
In our homes, at work, as I mentioned in the introduction, when we go out in public. And it seems that it's even more important today. And even some of the issues have changed. I mean, would you say that it's getting more dangerous if well,
I think the danger is, I think it's random. That's the challenge, is that you never know when something's going to strike. You can see the statistics. We all read all read the newspapers. They say that the murder rate's going down, and that's fantastic. They say that, violence is going down. Perhaps it is. It depends on where you're at. But if it affects you, if you're the one person who's impacted, that's what you and your loved ones, that's what you're going to worry about. And so it comes down to the random violence is shocking. I mean, you can open the papers today, read online, your favorite news source, and there will be some story about some strange, horrible crime. And you don't want you or your loved ones to be the person in that story. So
all right, can we
that's,
start
yeah.
with that? Because I think that's becoming more scarier and scarier.
Mhm.
With 24-hour news service, and every day something horrible happens somewhere here in the United States, right? Either at a school or, anything, out in public. So can we start with the out in public? I mean, you talk
Sure.
about going jogging, for instance, or going, you talk about going to, uh, just going out into a public place, a restaurant, those kinds of things, which
Mhm.
all of us do, let's say,
Right.
yeah.
Well, the first thing I would say is you got to be in the moment. You have to be aware. And if you're taking away your senses, you're injuring your ability right up front to be aware. A couple simple things. And if people will be like, oh, this is really easy. Some of these things are easy to do. Your phone. Most people use their mobile device. They use it all the time. But if you're walking on the street, if you're out on the street and you're exposed and your face is buried in your phone, you have no awareness. Imagine if you were trying to play a sport like basketball or football and you're looking at your phone. you're not going to do too well.
That's
So
true.
the thing was, it's the same thing on this here. When you're out going for a walk, say you're in New York City and you're walking down the street and you're staring at your phone, you appear to an adversary, a potential criminal, somebody who wants to do harm to you. I use the term throughout the book, as you know, I use the term adversary because who is that? What's that look like? I don't know. It varies depending on the person. But you want to have that phone. You can use your phone, but if you need to use it, you need to go to a safe place. Step into a business, step into a coffee shop, step into a, go into the lobby of a hotel, go someplace off the street where you're less exposed. I'll term that a hard point. That's one of the topics I talk about. The first 30 pages of the first book, I use something I call the look twice mindset. And so there, I kind of lay out these details, just talking to regular, normal, everyday folks without a lot of jargon, and say, you need to move to a hard point, someplace where you're going to be separated from a potential adversary so they can't get to you, where there's people around you, where you can call for help, where nobody's going to jump you or push you. But take that phone, put that away until you're in that type of a place.
And then you also say you're more vulnerable if you have your AirPods on or your headphones, then you're really not connected or difficult to be aware, right?
100%. You just gave up your hearing. So,
Yeah.
if you're out, as I said in the book there, if you're out on a jog and you're wearing, your earbuds or you have headphones on, you can't hear and somebody can come right up next to you and you've given up a huge advantage. So that's something that if you want to do that, you probably need to be in the gym, probably need to be on a machine in a gym. If you're out on a running trail, if you're in, again, using a New York example, if you're in Central Park running along and you have your headphones on, an adversary can visually see that you are now hearing impaired from a distance. You've taken away your hearing. You are a softer target and you're more likely to be pursued by an adversary.
Another thing that gray man, you talk about gray
Mhm.
man. Tell us what that is. Because
The
I think
gray
I,
man
yeah,
concept. Yeah.
I do that.
And that's smart. I'm glad you
Yeah.
do that. And I'd love for people in your audience to do that. First thing is you want to live under the radar. The gray man is, and I'll define the concept here in just a second. The gray man is really the epitome of that. That's where you're really taking it to a higher level. You want to walk through life and you want to be less visible. You want to not stand out. For example, here's an easy one. People wear shirts and the shirt will say some slogan on it. It can be a sports team. Well, if you're in the wrong town and somebody's pretty fired up about their team, you may get attention you don't like because you got the wrong team. But if you're from New York and you're in Boston and you're wearing the wrong team, somebody may make comments to you. You may get some attention there, or vice versa. So maybe choose where you do something like that, where you're going to wear that. If you have political slogans, somebody's political slogan that say you like may really be offensive to somebody else and vice versa. So maybe choose not, this is the gray man concept, choose not to have slogans. Just have clothing that you kind of slip through life where people don't notice you. That's if your audience thinks back to this type of a
And I just
person,
want to,
please
because it
go ahead.
would be really important, I'm think for your kids not to have them have slogans on their t-shirts. I think I
Absolutely.
know we've probably destroyed a whole a business here by saying this, but but it does ring true. You're right. Anyway,
Yeah, it's just living under the radar, though, trying to slide through life where you're not too memorable, where people are like, who was that? Or they don't even remember. Did you see somebody come by earlier? What'd they look like? They're kind of average height. They had a normal, average, regular haircut, nothing crazy. They didn't have anything that really stuck in my mind. They just, I saw somebody come by, describe them. I really can't. I don't have a lot to say. That's the gray man. And that's the person who, as they slide through life, will not draw as much attention from a potential adversary. And that is mitigating risk.
and I've noticed because I am in New York City and I do
Mhm.
travel a lot. Women don't wear jewelry too much anymore, myself
Mhm.
included. I
Yep.
don't wear, yeah. When you're traveling and don't have expensive luggage. don't wear jewelry and expensive luggage and an expensive outfit, right? Then you're not a gray man or woman.
It's super true. I know I'm married for a long time. My wife, when we go overseas, she has a nice ring she wears here in the United States. When we go overseas, even to countries that are not difficult places, she has just a silicone rubber ring that she'll put on. And
Yeah.
she also has just a very, very simple plain gold band because she doesn't want to have a diamond that draws attention. Not that it's huge, but it can draw attention, especially if you're in a developing country
Yeah.
where that is, a month's salary or two or three or four or six. You don't want to have that. It's just mitigating risk, taking the risk away before it becomes a problem. That's part of planning ahead. Absolutely true.
And you also mentioned a cultural, be sure you're dressing culturally appropriate. I mean, I was in Dubai on the beach, and
Mhm.
you can imagine how people dress. And one woman on the beach was in a bikini, which was not something you do in a Middle Eastern country. But anyway, yeah, don't stand out.
Long time ago, I was in a country in West Africa, and they're very very different environment. It was a difficult environment. There were a lot of things going on there. There was a lot of there was some unrest on the streets, but the French, they still had their little enclave, and I being a visitor in the area, I popped into that enclave and there were people who were sunbathing, wearing bikinis, and hanging out like nothing was going on. But then when you walked a few blocks down the street, people were burning tires, which you know how much smoke that produces, and
Yes.
they were getting pretty aggressive. And it was just the dichotomy that was strange. But there are things that are appropriate and not appropriate. Don't wear a cowboy hat if you're in the place like I just described.
Yeah.
Probably not working well. Works great in Mexico, works
Yeah.
great here in portions of the United States, but doesn't work everywhere. Identifies you as an outsider and somebody who maybe is easier to target.
It's interesting when you say that, I'm thinking also you can, I don't know if this is falls in line with what we're talking about, but this again was this was in Russia, and a couple who, actually a very wealthy couple who was on this trip that I was on had suitcases that looked like they came from the Salvation Army, because
Mhm.
they didn't want to look as if they were wealthy, but it had the opposite effect because it really called attention to them, because that didn't really fit the picture either. That, it was, what I'm saying? It was like, yeah. Um,
I would say you want to choose appropriate stuff.
yeah,
I use the term normal, but you and I both know, and your audience knows, what's normal.
yeah, what's
Normal
normal?
defines on what you know, this goes back to a concept I'll introduce here, baseline. You want to have a baseline. This is how you can pick up when there's a problem. You want to have a baseline for what's normal around your home, what's normal around your place of employment, around if you go to a house of worship, what's normal there? What's normal at the local shopping mall or the strip mall or wherever you choose to spend your time? What's normal at your gym if you belong to a gym? When something starts to deviate from normal, that means it warrants further investigation. That's where you need to say, hey, something's weird here, and you start paying attention. Baseline's a really important concept. Even like what you said there with the luggage. If people who are traveling to a specific area have, I'll use that term again, normal suitcases, that's something that's not going to deviate from the baseline. But if you got a really high end, super fancy suitcase, it's going to draw attention. It's a display of affluence, and that will certainly bring attention on you that in a lot of conditions you don't want. But if you go the other extreme, that can also be a problem. You want to try to blend in, going back to the gray man concept, blending in so you just kind of vanish in the crowd. That's pretty easy to do when you start to think about it and you look at the different pieces of your life and you say, how can I be less memorable? That's what I encourage your audience to do.
Now, Tim, I want to get into the specifics of what you do when you find yourself in a situation that you didn't create. I think you mentioned this in the beginning, like the kind of random shootings or, stuff that happens at schools, happens in malls, it happens everywhere now, unfortunately. How do you get out of the situation? What do you do? You're in a restaurant. We can take specific ones that you talk about in the book.
Sure.
Schools. Yeah, okay.
One of the things DHS, they have their protocols they put out, and this is a good one. It's called Run, Hide, Fight. It's a standard training thing that DHS pushes out, and I support that. One thing you want to do, like for example, at work, let's use workplace violence for, a lot of times you will have something that somebody's involved in outside of work, and they may bring that into work. For example, they have a partner and they're having arguments at home. Well, the partner may be estranged from them. They know they're going to be at work. So they come to the workplace and say, I want to see so and so. I just want to talk. That's probably not a great plan. It's probably not going to end real well. And that's where hopefully you have a security presence that says, so and so's talking right now. Maybe you can talk to them later. Or sorry, they're working right now. Not a good time to talk. Please, you're not welcome here. So, because if somebody comes in and the conversation degrades, then that's where they may pull out a weapon. You may have a situation happen. So you try to prevent that with the security presence. If there's an issue, though, before there's an issue, while you're clear in mind, right now, you and I are thinking very clearly. We don't have adrenaline pouring through our body. We're not hearing gunshots in the distance going, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Because when you have the adrenaline dump and it pours through your body, it becomes more difficult to think clearly and you start to make decisions that are not sound. So in advance of that, when it's a sunny, nice day, you say, what am I going to do if something happens? First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try to run away. If there's workplace violence, I'm going to try to run away. Ask yourself, where am I going to go? Well, you want to get away, you want to get out of the building, you want to keep running far enough away that you will no longer be impacted by anything that's happening there. Assuming that there may be gunfire involved, you want to get behind something that is going to stop what we call the effects of fire, the effects of gunfire. A very thick wall. I'm not talking drywall, I'm talking concrete. You want to be behind a building. You want to be down the street in a business with people calling for help, staying on your phone. So you want to plan in advance where you're going to go. So you have a couple places you can run to. Then from there, if you can't run, you got to hide. Most people played when they were a kid, they played hide and seek. While you're clear in mind when something isn't happening, you want to pick, as an adult, you want to pick the very best hiding places you can find in your workplace. 2, 3, 4, 5 different places that are pretty sound where you can go if you have to, and you can hide. If you're doing that when you're calm, then you're going to be much better at choosing spots. Because if you're all amped up with the adrenaline running through your system, you're probably going to pick foolish spots that are pretty easy to find.
So
So
be
do that.
prepared, like we said in the beginning, or like you said, be
Absolutely.
prepared, planning ahead. So you go to work, you know where the spots are going to be. What about, okay, so but your work, we assume that you have a pretty good idea. You know where you are familiar with the building,
Mhm.
right?
You
But
need to
let's
be.
say you're at a restaurant, or let's say and something happens, or let's say you're in a public place or a hospital or someplace where
Sure.
it isn't, yeah. Then what do you do? I mean, what do you, okay.
Let me introduce another term here. I'll call that the X. So the X is where on the ground where something bad happens. If you've seen a war movie, that's the ambush site, the kill zone from the war movies. So a criminal is or an adversary. If they're going to do something to you, where that's happening, a place of their choosing, where perhaps it's darker. Perhaps there's no CCTV camera coverage. Perhaps there's no law enforcement presence. There's not a lot of people around. That's where they're choosing to do their evil deeds, to commit their crimes. So that's the X. The thing you want to do when something happens, maintain your wits. You want to get off the X as quickly as possible if you can. Sometimes you can't. Sometimes, unfortunately, bad things happen to good people. But if you can, you want to get off the X because the criminal, the adversary, oftentimes isn't going to want to follow you very far because that's the place that they've chosen to do this. If you can get half a block down the street, or a block away and make a lot of noise and scream and draw attention to yourself. If you have to, fight like your life depends on it, because it probably does. But if it's a 350-pound, 6'7" professional wrestler, that may not work out well for you. But you got to do what you got to do. Get off the X and get away. And just understand they probably selected that location for a reason. That's one thing I would say. But keep your wits about you. You're going to have adrenaline pour through your body. Another thing I want to tell your audience about that happens to a lot of folks when they're in a situation like that, something called the soda straw effect. And that's where your vision, this goes back to the caveman or cavewoman that we all came from. Your vision goes down to almost like a straw in front of you, think of like a straw, but a little bit bigger, right in front of your face. So you actually lose a lot of your peripheral vision to the left and the right. Why is that? That's so your body and your brain can focus on the threat that's immediately to your front. So understand that when you're dealing with that, you may have to physically turn your head to the left and to the right in order to be able to see what's happening on the sides. This is something some police officers have experienced. They're involved in a situation with an adversary, and they're engaged there. And then somebody tackles them from the side. They never saw it coming because their peripheral vision went all the way just to the front. So you'll see a well-trained police officer will turn their head to the left and right once they have the situation under control so they can assess what's going on around them. Understanding that is an advantage for your audience, knowing that that's probably going to happen to them because it's how we're wired as humans. They just need to be aware of that.
I've had several incidents in reading your book that it made me think about, and you're describing this situation. My partner, he and I were in Paris, and we were on a
Mhm.
train going from Normandy to Paris, actually. And we're on the train, very few people, Sunday afternoon. Suddenly, we see these two guys only sitting on the train right beside us. And they seem to be kind of, I think you mentioned this kind of go with your gut, right? Didn't feel comfortable. There was something about it. We were a mark, as you described it.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden, some young girl in the back of the train, nobody else on this particular train, then everybody had gotten off, she starts singing to distract us. I think she was part of this whole thing. She was going to distract us and they were going to rob us. And there was a stop, and we got off the stop, and I did just what you said. She didn't expect it. They all got off. They were right behind us. And I screamed my partner's name, just yelled it out and threw my pocketbook up. They ran. Yeah. And it was, I think that's what you're talking about, right? Yeah.
It is. That's a great example. So, that's a situation where even though you don't have a well-developed baseline because you're not from there, you're still paying attention to things your subconscious is picking up that maybe haven't filtered into your conscious mind. You're saying, hey, something doesn't seem right here. A couple things you did that I really liked. First off, be in the moment, be aware, and have them see, hey, I'm aware, I'm watching what's going around, not get crazy about it, not going over the top, not being alerting that you're, oh my gosh, I'm nervous, I'm shaking, or no, just being present, seeing them, looking, looking away, talking with your partner, changing your position, because again, they're selecting that position. If they follow you off the train, they have determined that you're a mark, and they do work as teams. A lot of adversaries don't work alone because they're far more effective if there's two or three, especially if they have, a woman who's singing. She's part of their team. They've done this before. It's probably not their first rodeo. And then when you draw attention that they don't want, you just spoiled the whole show. The other thing I would encourage, if you have to, and not everyone can run fast, but if you have to, if you get off the train, you make a scene, and then you start to move towards light if it's nighttime, or you start to move towards people, and you start when you're determining there's a problem and the hair is lifting up on the back of your neck, you feel that. You start thinking, what am I going to do now? Right in the moment, and you're planning. And then you work your plan, you execute your plan, knowing things are going to change very rapidly. You did some good stuff there, though. I encourage that.
Thank you. And we only have 3 minutes left. Your book is great. I mean, there is so much more in the book, but there's just one other thing that you mentioned that I think is really important as well. Pattern. If you develop the
Yep.
same pattern all the time, you really become a mark. They know when you go get your mail or whatever you do. And if you do always do it at the same time every day, not a good thing. I think that was, yeah.
Especially for young women. I use an example in the book. So a lot of people go to the grocery store at the same time. One specific example, and this actually happened in real life, but one specific example, there was a person who went to the grocery store about a half an hour before closing the same day every week because they were a procrastinator. And somebody was looking for that person. They saw him one time and they guessed, human behavior. I bet that they're here right beforehand and they're rushing around and they seemed a little disorganized. And I bet they're going to be here the same time next week. And they came back and there was the person in the grocery store. And they went over, they wanted to have a conversation with them about something. And it was, I mean, that's how people get found. Pattern analysis, when somebody's being targeted, if you have an adversary, say, for example, they have a former partner who's trying to watch them, they're going to know when they get up, when they go to sleep, when they eat, where they tend to eat, what they're doing. You fall into patterns. Everybody has patterns. The key thing is being aware of your patterns, mixing it up a little bit. If you change your pattern by 15 or 20 minutes, you'll throw somebody off because it's a very lonely thing when somebody's sitting on the street and they're watching for you. They're going to feel that all eyes are on them and they're going to start feeling agitated. We call it burning, heating up the spot, burning up the ground there. I've had to do that stuff for work where I've had to watch something and I've been standing there. And after 15 or 20 minutes and not seeing what you expected, you feel like everybody's staring at you. You're like, I got to go, I got to go, I got to go. You can do that to your adversaries. Just change your schedule a little bit. Maybe don't go to the same restaurant at the same time every fourth day or every Thursday. Don't go out to brunch with your friends on Sunday morning at the same place at the same time every week. Switch it up a little bit. But I also want to caution your audience, don't be paranoid. Think about the
Yeah, and that
possible. Yeah,
I hate to cut you off. I
of
mean,
course.
yeah, this is a great I mean, it's a great conversation. And I do, as I say, there's so many more examples in the book and there's so much more to talk about. And so Tim Beard is the author who I've been talking to, former CIA guy. The book, Look Twice, Your Guide to Staying Safe in an Unsafe World. This is great. I have to have you on the show. We have to continue the conversation, but
And please have
again,
your audience check out my website. It's
yeah,
Tim Beard, Beard,
yep.
timbeardauthor.com. And there they can see a picture of me. And there's a link there to my Amazon Author Central page where the first book's available right now, came out yesterday in print, audio, and ebook. And volume 2 and 3 are up for ebook pre-purchase, but they can see them all there. Kathryn, this has been great. I really appreciate you
This
having me on.
this has been really great. Thanks so much for the information. We all need it. Yeah, thanks, Tim.